Welcome to the Pivotal Decisions podcast, where we know that the decisions you make today will determine your tomorrow. I'm so thankful you are tuning into the podcast today. And if you like the podcast, if you enjoy the podcast, if you learn something from the podcast, it'd be great if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. All you have to do is go to YouTube, find Pivotal Decisions Podcast, hit that subscribe button, and you are good to go. Today is a dream come true that I can sit across the table from the one and only Mark Clifton.
Thank you.
I have been looking forward to this day. I can't tell you, it's been probably a year that I've been looking forward to this time with Mark Clifton, who has meant so much to me and my ministry, and you have helped me in tremendous ways. And not only your books, your preaching, but your podcast, all of that has been great, Mark. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be on this podcast with me.
Glad to do it, man. I was here at your church this morning, got to preach here, and enjoyed that, all three services.
It was incredible.
It was a lot of services, man.
Well, it makes me an old man, Mark.
It does.
That.
I can see that. And it was great to be here, and good to be with you today, and delighted to be on this podcast.
Good. Well, thank you, Mark.
Yep.
And what I want to do is just spend our time just getting to know you a little bit and also learn from you.
Okay.
And so you are kind of the guru of revitalization, replanting, and God is using you tremendously in that way. But a lot of people maybe don't know your whole story. How did you get there? How did you get to this place?
Well, my dad was a pastor. My great-granddad was a pastor. So I grew up in that. And but I always wanted to plant churches. Even before that was a popular thing. So we're talking 1977, 78, my senior year in high school, first year of college. I was very interested in church planting. And actually, the Lord allowed me to plant my first church my freshman year in college in 1978. Just a small little church, but it was a very exciting thing for me to do, and really grew in that and learned a lot from that. About my third year in college, there was a rural country church way up in North Missouri that my great uncle had reopened. It had been closed for 30 years. I mean, shut down, building not being used. He retired, moved up there, tore the boards off of the ceiling, swept out the building, fired up the potbelly stove. I'm not making this up. And just started holding church services. Well, he called me one day when I was a student at college, and he wanted me to come up and preach for him. And so I went up and preached one Sunday morning, and then he said, "Hey, Mark," I went back to the college that afternoon, and he called me, and he said, "Hey, Mark, the church voted to call you as pastor." And I said, "Uncle Bill, I didn't even know they were interviewing me, or I was there in view of a call." And he said, "Well, I didn't tell you in case they voted no." So I said, "True." Well, I had just turned this new church I planted over to another guy who showed up at college, and he was going to be the pastor of that new church. So I went. And so without knowing it, I'm going to a replant, all right? A church that had been closed for 30 years. And the Lord did an amazing work there. We built restrooms. We didn't have any restrooms. We built indoor restrooms. We built a little tiny wing on the side that had a little nursery. And we put a steeple on it, and we grew to about 100 people. And it was a really exciting time in my life. Yeah. And from that time on, I just was planting churches all through college and seminary. And went to Atlanta. That was when we were living in Kansas. Went to Atlanta, and the Home Mission Board back then asked me to come to Atlanta and start planting churches in the northern suburbs of Atlanta for northerners who'd moved to Atlanta, because the southern culture churches weren't too interested in absorbing all these northerners. This was in the early 1980s. Okay. And so I planted churches in Roswell, Alpharetta, Woodstock, that area, for a number of years. And then after that, I went to Kansas and Nebraska to serve as the state missions leader for that two-state convention. And in that role, I got to plant a number of churches. Then we went to Canada, and we planted churches in eastern Canada, in Montreal and Quebec. And then the North American Mission Board, by that time, that's what they called it, they asked me to be their national missionary for church planting for eastern Canada. So I did that. Okay, I'm getting there. And then, my parents were getting up in years, and my boys wanted to go to college in Kansas. And so the opportunity came back to come to Kansas City and be the director of missions in Kansas City. So we came back to Kansas City about 2002 or 3 to be the director of missions there. And when I did, I left Canada. We had 150 Southern Baptist churches across 6 time zones. When I came to Kansas City, I had 172 Southern Baptist churches in 2 counties. So I kind of had to recalibrate what's the Lord want me to do. And a number of these churches, Pastor, were holding on for dear life. And we'd seen a dozen or more of them close in the previous 2 years. So for the first time, I ever had to really stop and think about what's it mean to have a church die and close its doors. And I just thought you just got to keep planting more churches. You just plant them quicker than they die. That was kind of the idea. And because a dying church it's a difficult thing to deal with, and it's just easier to go across the street and start something brand new. But the Lord really spoke to me in that context because I saw all these dying churches, and I thought all these beautiful buildings, and what's it say to the community? And more importantly, what's it say about God that this church died, that it sat here on this corner for 100 years proclaiming the gospel and saying we believe the Bible from Genesis to the map in the back, and Jesus couldn't do anything, but he can't keep this church open. And it just came all over me and just crushed me that the reason Satan showed up the reason Satan was kicked out of heaven was he was jealous of God's glory. Now, the reason Satan showed up in the garden with the fruit and Adam and Eve was because he was jealous of God's glory. And the reason the church closes is because Satan was working there to rob God of his glory. So all of a sudden, replanting dying churches isn't just an act of missions or strategy, it's an act of worship. And that's when my whole life pivoted, and the Lord just put a change in my heart, and I started running toward dying churches. And since that time, I've been focusing almost entirely on replanting of dying churches. And that was 20 years ago, probably.
Wow.
So.
Well, you certainly have made a big impact. Grateful for that. You kind of alluded to this in your book, Reclaiming Glory. You mentioned that there's nothing about a dying church that brings glory to God. What does that mean to us?
Well, like I said, when you look at a congregation, look, we know the church isn't a building, but the community identifies what we say with where we meet and with the church building, in essence. And so, you look around and you say, well, Kmart's closed, and Montgomery Ward's closed, and Sears is closed, and my local grocery store is not there anymore. My local hardware store is not there anymore. Everything's changed. Yeah, and that church, will it close too? Well, the church shouldn't close if there are people to be reached and a community to be ministered to, because the gospel isn't transient. It's not here for just one generation. And when that church closes its doors, it just reinforces what people already think, is that the church it's just so much talk. It's not really real. If it was real, it wouldn't close its doors. And it robs God of his glory. And so it becomes an act of worship. And actually, an act of worship is what we were created to do. Paul wrote in Romans 12 that he beseeched us by the mercies of God to present our bodies a living sacrifice, fully acceptable, which is our reasonable service. It's an act of worship. And so then replanting a dying church becomes my act of worship. And maybe the hardest thing I've ever done, maybe the most costly thing I've ever done. But if it's worship, it's also the most joyful and meaning-fulfilling thing I've ever done. And that's what's neat about it. It is costly, it is hard, it is difficult, but at the same time, it is incredibly meaningful and incredibly rewarding.
I think, Mark, the people that listen to Pivotal Decisions we have some pastors that are listening today, and we have a lot of lay people in churches all over.
Sure.
So let's kind of go in those two categories. Let's talk first to some pastors.
Sure.
And they say, the statistics say there'll be over 1,000 Southern Baptist churches that close their doors this year.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's a lot of discouraged pastors that are listening. And what would you say to them today?
Well, what I say all the time is Jesus has a plan for your church. He has a plan for every church. And don't focus on how many people you have and try to get more people to come, I should say. Don't judge success by increasing your attendance. Judge success by how are you being faithful with the ones who are already there, first of all. And as my friend Jared Wilson said, love the church you have, not the church you wish you had. And so realize that your primary job as a pastor is obedience and loving the flock you have and being a missionary to the community that you find yourself in. And Jesus is the one who'll grow the church. But he grows the church as we show we are faithful and obedient in doing his work. So just hang in there and don't give up and don't walk away. And if your church is less than 100, I've never pastored a church of more than 150. I've never been asked to. Probably would if I'd asked to. But nonetheless, I've never been asked to. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. 50% of all of our churches have less than 50 in worship, and about 80% have less than 150. So you can be in a church of 75 or 80 or 20 people, but if you're faithful with those folks and they're growing in their knowledge of Jesus and you're sharing Jesus with the community, only eternity is going to reveal the true results of your labor. Don't grow weary in well-doing. Now, don't use that as an excuse to mail it in, to slide, to not work, to not minister, to not disciple, to not witness. If you're not doing that, then you're not being obedient. But if you do those things and you're obedient, then the Lord eventually will take care of the results. And you may not even see the results in your lifetime, but that's okay. You'll see them when you get to heaven. So just be encouraged in the work is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes we become so discouraged because we don't see the results we would like to see right now. But that's because we have an incomplete revelation. We don't see the full picture.
Right.
Yep.
You know, Mark, my first church, my first Sunday, I preached to 3 senior adult ladies.
Okay.
That was my first church.
Yep.
3 ladies, senior adults. They all sat on the back row.
Yeah.
So all the pews were empty,
Yeah.
all the way to the front. And I did the preaching. My wife led the singing.
Okay.
And that was how we started.
Sure.
And you talk about tough.
Yeah.
You know, it's tough preaching to 3 people.
Oh, it is.
And
It is.
so in a big room, you know.
It is.
And so that got discouraging.
Yeah.
And it never was a big church, but we were able to, you know, reach a few people, grew to about 40 people. And at that time, 40 people to me was incredible,
Right.
just because we went from 3 to 40. But you started to see life change.
Yeah.
You started to see families together. You started to see marriages being healed. And it wasn't about, well, I need 500 people now. I need
Right.
It was,
Right.
I saw God working and changing people's lives. To me, that's what I needed.
That's right.
It wasn't about how big it was.
Right. And I want to give encouragement to these pastors. Look, I know how hard it is to preach to a few people in a big room. All right. That's really hard to do. Now, I had the privilege of preaching here today. All the rooms were filled with lots of people, hundreds of people, 1,000 people. It's a big place. And recently I've been going to a church in Louisiana and filling the pulpit there some. And it's a big church, you know, huge crowds. I've been having an opportunity once in a while to walk into a church and, you know, they'll have a green room. And so they take me to the green room and I got a place to comb my hair and pray and get my Bible ready and get all ready. And they wire me up. And then when it's time, you know, I come out and then this huge worship team has done a great job of leading everybody in worship. And the congregation's all sitting there ready to hear it. But I want to tell you, for the last several months, I was the interim pastor of a church in Kansas City called Maple Hill. And on Palm Sunday, we had 8. Okay. And there was no green room. Nobody helped me get ready. I walked in, and the 8 were all scattered out in that sanctuary. This is Palm Sunday, right? And I'm telling you, it is really hard to preach like that. And so I really value what you guys are doing. It is harder to preach in that situation. But listen, you ought to be honored that God's called you to do that really hard task. And if you're gonna live this life and serve Him, then serve Him in the hard places. And that's a hard place. Yeah. And so it's okay to be discouraged about it sometime. But I want you to be encouraged that you're not alone in this and that it is hard. It's not just you. It's hard to do that, but don't quit. You have no idea how important that is to edify you, to grow you, and even those 7 or 8 people who are there, only eternity is going to reveal what your message said to them that day. So be faithful. But I just want you to know, Pastor, who's out there in a smaller congregation, in a declining church, in a bigger building than you need, it's hard. But, man, you got a brotherhood that loves you. You got a Savior that loves you. You got a church that matters to the Lord. It should matter to you, and don't quit.
Yeah. Good word. That's a good word. Let's kind of move on to the other side of that. Maybe a church, you know, I'm thankful to be a part of a church that's healthy, at least at this moment. And just only because of God's favor. Sure. That's it. Not because of me. But what do you say to those churches that they're in a good spot? How can they maybe come alongside another church and say, hey, we want to encourage you, walk with you?
Well, the first thing is you got to realize that they're going to be somewhat perhaps uncertain about what your motive is and what your agenda is. You know, they're a weak church, a struggling church with few people in a large building. Maybe financially they're hurting as well. And here your church seems to be doing very well, attracting people and growing and healthy and got a good, strong staff. And then you come alongside them, and sometimes in the climate we're in, they assume you want to just take them over, maybe take their property, maybe absorb them into the mothership kind of thing. And you have to go to great lengths and be very patient to understand their anxiety about that. It's a little bit like your aged aunt who has no children and no spouse, and all of a sudden the nieces and nephews start hanging around because they want to inherit the farm. I mean, there's a sense of what do you want from me, right?
Yeah.
And you have to help convince them we don't want anything from you. We want to love you. You're a sister congregation, and so how can we love you? So one of the things a larger church can do is if that pastor does have a family, if he still has kids at home, and maybe there are hardly any youth or children in that church, and maybe his wife is the youngest woman in that church, make sure your congregation finds some way to reach out to that pastor's family. Find some Sunday school class or women's group in your church to adopt that lady and those kids into their world, and bring them into the fellowship of that. Connect with them, pray with them, give them a chance to connect with you, to just so that they know there's somebody in this town that loves me and cares for me. Because if you're the youngest woman in that church and yours are the only kids or teenagers in that church, can be a really hard place. So can I minister to that family? Find out when the pastor's and wife's anniversary is, and just your church send them a gift card and say, hey, go out and eat. Or we'll watch your children while you go out and eat on your anniversary. You just want to know we love you. And then how can we pray for you? And let this congregation know that you kind of have a habit of praying for churches on Sunday morning. We would like to pray for your church. And then let them know you prayed for them. Put the picture of the pastor in the church up on the screen and pray for that pastor and for that church. And then let the church know, hey, we prayed for you this week. And then again, if you hear anything, can we do it? Can we come and clean up your lawn? Can we come and help paint your restrooms? We just want to serve. We have a group of people that want to serve other churches. And if you'll do that consistently, they'll learn they can trust you. And once they learn they can trust you, you're not going to take them over. You're not trying to absorb them, that you value them and what they're doing. Many of them will begin to lean into you. And then you'll have some real opportunities to really lean into them. As I said earlier in a sermon we'd preached this morning, there was a church in Kansas City that had some tremendous ministry opportunities all around them. And these group of elderly people who remained in that church loved these people in this community. But the people in the community, many of them were addicted to drugs or to alcohol or had some really difficult, challenging life situations, these young people. And these older adults, many of them didn't even live in that neighborhood anymore. They didn't know really how or even have the bandwidth to deal with those problems. So that older church reached out to another church in town who had a lot of young people and had some bandwidth and said, would you come and help us do this? And so that other church came in and did some of the recovery ministry and the day-to-day ministry. That's what it has to take. You have to take the strengths that you've been given and then give them to a congregation that needs those strengths to reach their community.
That's great. That's great, Mark. What great word. I want to honor your time, Mark,
sure.
And honor the time of our listeners. But I want to ask you one more question.
Okay.
You go to a lot of churches, you talk to a lot of pastors, you see a lot of hard things in churches. What gives you hope today?
That Jesus does have a plan for every church. And that whatever I go, like today at your church, or whether it was Maple Hill with the 8 people there, those are his children. Those are his bride. It doesn't matter. They've all been redeemed. They're all part of that family. You know, it's such an encouragement. And they all understand when the gospel's preached, they come up and they say, that really meant something to me, that the Spirit's talking to them. The church is alive. It's very much alive. In all of its forms, that's what's encouraging. Yeah. And one day we're going to see when the Lord returns and this bride is perfected instantly and rises up in the air to meet him, we're going to say, oh, that's what it was all about. Yeah. So that's what we think.
Praise God for that, Mark. And I want to thank you, Mark, for being a part of the episode today on Pivotal Decisions, for your time and your ministry, all that you do to encourage me and many, many pastors all over North America. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Pastor.
And all of you listening, thank you for being a part of Pivotal Decisions. Be sure and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's a blessing to us. And you remember that the decisions you make today will determine your tomorrow.